The BS Report is a free-flowing conversation that occasionally touches on mature subjects.
First of all,
This is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
it might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the Sports Guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
Welcome to the BS Report. It is a Thursday here in Southern California. The flag is half-mast here at the Sports Guy Mansion. Wes Welker, no longer a Patriot. It was probably the right move. I feel like they had inside information on something. They didn't want to sign him for like 2 years. Something was going on. Bill Barnwell from Grantland is on the line. He's been writing about free agency all week. You actually agreed with the move to go from Welker to Amendola.
I think the inside information was that Wes Welker is, 32?
Yep.
I mean, that's not, I feel like the decision to move on from Welker, I agree with you, is something that they've planned for a while now, because they've had every opportunity to give Welker another long-term deal for the better part of 2 years, and they've either ducked the question, or they've given him a short-term contract, or they've, tried to negotiate terms that wouldn't have made sense for Welker. And yesterday, reportedly, they had a chance to match a very reasonable 2-year, $12 million contract and passed on it. So very clearly, this is not a deal they wanted to make one way or another.
So from my sources, it was like 2 years, $10 million. It could have stretched to $16 million, but he would have had to hit some crazy incentives. I think All Pro was part of it, which was semi-realistic. But how many All Pro spots are there?
Mm-hmm.
Like
two.
Like what is there? 2? Is there 4?
I believe there is 2.
2. Not that realistic. Then I think he had to hit 1,500 yards and 150 catches. So it was really a 2-year, $10 million deal. And the part that I think I understand this, but so if they pay Amendola a 10-year guaranteed, but it's over 5 years, doesn't that spread over the course of the 5 years in the cap?
Well, the way it works is that the bonus that Amendola gets is spread over 5 years in the cap. You can guarantee some of the base salary, and that'll be guaranteed for that specific year on the cap. But the cap hit shouldn't be appreciably different for Amendola versus Welker. I don't have the exact details of the contract in front of me. I don't know if they've been released yet, but I don't think it's going to be significantly different. Basically, the Patriots made a choice to just choose Danny Amendola over Wes Welker for the next couple of years. Yeah,
well, I feel like they probably structured that contract so it's less of a cap hit this year. That had to have been part of it, because if you just have the choice between what you already have in Welker versus Amendola, and it's the same money, you're probably going to keep Welker if only to keep Brady happy. So I do feel like there must have been some cap relief. But the other interesting part here, you talked about how Amendola, his injury history. Welker has a better track record of staying on the field, but he's also older. He's played more seasons, but really he only had the one injury, which, as you noted in today's column in Grantland, that injury happened in week 17. Amendola's injury happened in week 1, which was just a timing thing. But when you look at like Gronkowski and the trouble he's had staying on the field the last couple years, and now you have Amendola, who has not exactly been rolling off 16-game seasons. As a Patriot fan, that's what makes me nervous. At least I knew Welker was going to play. And Amendola, even though those might have been 2 fluke injuries, one was a broken collarbone. What was the other one?
He had a dislocated elbow.
Right, elbow. So 2 relatively freak injuries. The collarbone worries me a little bit, but at least I knew Welker was going to play. And that was what my dad was very upset. He really liked Wes Welker, and he just was like, this guy can't stay in the field. We have Gronkowski and Rasai Dowling, and we invest in these guys who can't stay on the field, and this is why we haven't won a Super Bowl. By the way, is there anything more annoying than Patriot fans freaking out?
Considering they're 2 plays away from winning 5 Super Bowls in a decade, yeah.
Yeah. I think It's really hard to criticize Bill Belichick, especially his track record with knowing when to cut ties with the players is just about impeccable. I guess the only one that you mentioned this today, the Vinatieri one, I know on paper it was the right move, but I do think you need a certain number of dudes who understand the Patriot way. And I think that was a big reason why they won the second and third Super Bowls, was the people they had who kind of executed the Belichick vision and the spirit of the team. And, the team is always ahead of the individual, stuff like that. And when you start getting rid of those guys, you can kind of pass the point where you get rid of one too many. And if you're making the case for Vinatieri, just great teammate, clutch, reliable, and for the amount of money that they probably saved versus what it would have taken to keep him. I don't know. I don't know if that was a good move. That was the only one. What was the one out of all of those? Were there any that you thought were bad?
I don't remember loving the Vinatieri one. He was obviously great on Dunkin' Donuts commercials in the Massachusetts area. He was,
Right.
Papa Gino's commercials were phenomenal. But the thing for me is Belichick, as you said, Belichick's done this so many times now, and it feels like every time we say, okay, what is he doing? Doesn't make any sense. Why are we trading Randy Moss in the middle of a season for a second-round pick? Why are we dumping Lawyer Malloy a week before the season and letting him go to the Bills, who were playing in week one?
Right.
This comes up over and over again, and I feel like, sure, they might have been better with Vinatieri, but they would have been marginally better. I feel like maybe they will be better with Welker next year than they will be with Amendola. It's entirely possible, but over the next 2 years, over the next 3-4 years, I don't think so. And I think that as much as the Patriots have been about, sort of subjugating yourself and playing for the team and being, sort of a part of a bigger picture, part of that has also been about being willing to change. It's been about, bringing in new players. It's been about knowing when to move on. It's been about trusting that the process that has led you to those guys in the first place will lead you to more examples of those guys in the future. And I think that's really important and a real big reason why they've been successful and haven't had to really rebuild beyond the fact that they've had Tom Brady.
We should also mention anybody who watches 10 NFL games at the same time on a Sunday, of which you and I are in that group. Amendola is really good when he plays. He's somebody that you definitely notice when he's out there and running around and doing things. And the similarities to him and Welker, right down to the fact that they went to the same college, it is pretty eerie. Like if you were going to clone Welker with somebody 5 years younger, a lot of what you would do in the cloning would end up being Amendola. So
right,
if he stays on the field, it's the right move. And the question is, can he stay on the field?
Mm-hmm. Right. And it isn't just like, Amendola has a very small track record or he has 1 year of success. I mean, Sam Bradford's been a totally different guy throwing to Danny Amendola than he has been throwing to everyone else he's thrown to. Not that they've been great players he's been throwing to, but it's the difference between Sam Bradford being a total bust and Sam Bradford being a pretty good-looking quarterback.
Yep.
I feel like people forget, and I wrote about this today at Grantland, people forget just how unknown Wes Welker was when he got to the Patriots. This is the guy who couldn't start on the Miami Dolphins playing behind Marty Booker and Chris Chambers. He had 92 career catches. He had 1 career touchdown. I don't believe he even had 1,000 yards receiving over his entire career before he got to New England. And I think Patriots fans knew him because he had always played pretty well against the Patriots. He had been sort of a thorny, versatile player, and you'd always hear people say, oh, he'd be a great player for the Patriots one day when Welker would play against the Patriots in those games. But nobody expected Wes Welker to become Wes Welker. And Belichick looked into the future, and not looked into the future, but he projected into the future and said, this is what I think Wes Welker can be for this team. Now, when you say Welker's the reliable guy, Welker's the guy we know is going to be healthy, that's all true from the past. We don't know that Wes Welker's going to be better at 33 and at 34 than he was 31 and 32. He might be, but he might also fall off a cliff and be, a shell of the player he once was. He may get hurt more because he's an older player coming off a torn ACL a couple of years ago. In general, you always want to go for the player who's entering his peak, entering his prime. And I think Belichick's very aware of that, and I think that's why the Amendola move makes a lot of sense to me personally.
I always wonder with the concussion history with stuff like this, and the team just having more inside information than anybody on how many times a guy's bell has been rung, and it is a little suspicious that they're walking away from him at this point because he had a really good year last year. Again, he fit in perfectly with what they were trying to do. He was beloved by Tom Brady, and most important, the price wasn't prohibitive. If they were offering him 2 years 10 and he went for 2 years 12, you're not breaking the bank. It's that this wasn't like James Posey. This wasn't even Johnny Damon. This was, and this is what somebody I was emailing with yesterday compared it to. This was like potentially reminiscent of letting Johnny Damon go to trade for Coco Crisp, where it's like, oh no, he can do all the same things Johnny Damon, but then you actually get the guy and he can't. I feel a little better about this than I did about Coco Crisp.
I do too. For sure I do. And you talked about Amendola kind of being a clone of Welker, and he really is. It's not just two random white dudes who were comparing because they had they have the same skin color. It's Amendola was better than Welker during their senior year at school at Tech, respectively, and he's had a better pro career than Welker had before Welker got to the Patriots. I mean, we're not talking about a guy who's a total rick. The only really big thing I'm worried about is the injury history, which is something, but it's not necessarily something that would preclude me from trusting that Amendola is going to play 80 games over the next 5 years. I think it's entirely possible.
If it was an isolated guy, it would be one thing. But when you team him up with Gronkowski, who's gone down the last 2 seasons and had an injury history in college, then I'm nervous because now I have 3 killer receivers, but 2 of them have had repeated trouble staying on the field. And then obviously the other part we haven't even talked about yet is you let him go, but then he goes to a team that you're trying to beat. And, he's going to be great on Denver, at least for 1 year. There's no question. And he's going to be motivated. He's going to be in FU mode. We've already seen Peyton Manning, turn Brandon Stokely into a fantasy guy. And then Brandon Stokely was basically out of the league, came back and was starting for fantasy teams last year just because Manning is so good at throwing to those little shifty slot guys. I think Welker's going to be great in the Broncos.
I do too. Agree? And I don't want to take away from – I don't think Welker's going to fall off a cliff suddenly because he's leaving the Patriots. I mean, if he was going to play for the Browns or the Titans, sure, I might have my doubts. But
right. If he's with Chris Wenke, it might be a little different.
Right. And I feel like he's going to be a productive guy, but he's not going to have the bulk numbers he had in New England because Thomas is going to get the ball and Eric Decker's going to get the ball. And yes, Gronkowski and Hernandez and guys will get the ball. But Welker, had the sort of huge target numbers that I feel like won't happen in Denver. Because I think Manning will spread the ball around a little more than Tom Brady did with Welker in New England.
I just called the Browns quarterback Chris Wenke. I think I'm turning into Eddie Endelman. It's finally happening. After years and years of making Eddie Endelman jokes as a kid when I was in Boston driving around, now I'm calling the Browns quarterback Chris Wenke. What is the Browns quarterback name? Why can't I remember?
It was Brandon Weeden.
Brandon Weeden. Called him Chris Wenke.
I think BS Report first ballot Hall of Famer Mike Lombardi is not going to be happy that you don't remember his team's quarterback.
I think it's a bad sign for the 2013 Browns that I really seriously thought their quarterback was Chris Wenke. They made my favorite signing. I really hope this doesn't turn into another Daryl Morey thing where I'm obviously have real attachment to the Browns now because of Lombardi and Alex Scheiner, but I love Paul Kruger. Paul Kruger killed the Patriots. I thought he was when I saw the big free agent list, and all Patriot fans live in this world where there's a chance we might actually spend money on somebody, and then we realize every spring, oh yeah, that's right, we never spend money on anybody. But that was the guy I was looking at. I was like, man, if we got Paul Kruger and the Browns got him, a little pricey, but would you put that in your top 3 signings so far?
I don't know about top 3. I'd put it in maybe the top 10. I think it's a high upside signing, and that's really something I look for when I look at free agency. I hate it when teams spend guaranteed money and give millions and millions of dollars to a guy who you can get off the street for the league minimum for 1 year. Someone like a Donnie Avery, for example, who got guaranteed money from somebody yesterday. I don't remember who, but got guaranteed money, and you can find 10 Donnie Averys if you are willing to bring 10 guys into camp and find out which one of them is healthy and which one of them is going to play. Kruger, I mean, the upside's there. The Browns have had the worst pass rushing football since they came back into the league. I think they have the fewest sacks of any team that actually, came back as the new Cleveland Browns. And Kruger, I mean, if he plays consistently, if he gets a little better against the run, if he can play all three downs, he's going to be a double-digit sack guy. He just has that kind of, explosiveness, and you saw that this year. I think he had 12 sacks in the final 12 games for the Ravens. So
he was tough.
I like
we couldn't block him.
Possibly getting a star,
Yeah, we couldn't block him. He was like, I always judge these guys by when my team is playing them or if I bet against the team they're playing in football. But that was one of the guys that always jumped out at me. And actually, I'm going to tread carefully here because the Boston fans might be listening. But Bernard Carmel Pollard is somebody that I was very surprised they waived. I thought he was a big part of that defense. He was really physical. I know he was playing hurt last year with the ribs and he wasn't great in pass defense, but he had a physicality that I thought kind of embodied what they were doing. And it was something that really, to be honest, the Patriots have been missing the last few years. You mentioned
what you're saying, Bill, what you're promoting here is that the Patriots should consider signing Bernard Pollard.
Well, don't think I didn't get a ton of emails about that yesterday. The most common theory seems to be people saying the Patriots should sign Pollard and then just put him in a room, like in Lost when the guy lived in that vault. Just keep him down there until the contract ends, which I thought was an interesting idea. I'm not against it. The other thing, people seem to be worried the Ravens intentionally waived him so he'd sign with the Patriots and that there might be a Manchurian candidate type of thing going on here.
I like the double agent idea.
He comes to the Patriots, starts killing people in practice.
He contains multitudes. He really does. I'm excited by the possibilities with Bernard Pollard. But I think, safety is just one of those positions this year where there's just so many guys out there, and you see teams like the Buccaneers gave Deshaun Goldson, the guy who was getting, who I think is a pretty good player, but the guy who was getting burned in the first half of that NFC Championship game, gave him, $40 million over 5 years, when you can get Bernard Pollard probably for 10 over 3. Is that really, are you really getting that much more for your buck by getting Goldson as opposed to Pollard? I don't think so.
That was a good point you made in today's piece. And the other point you made, Denver getting Rogers Cromartie basically for 1 year, $5 million as a cornerback stopgap. I thought that was really smart. I liked, who was the team that signed Chris Canty?
The Baltimore Ravens.
That was smart. That was like short money. That was a steal. I like Cliff Averill more than most. I was surprised that Seattle was able to get him just by offering 2 years, because I think he could be really good on that team. In general, it really does seem like there's too many players and not enough cap space. And this is what my Patriots peeps are telling me. The Patriots are very focused on kind of waiting this out. It's almost like one of those fantasy auctions when people blow their wads in the first hour, and then at the end of the auction, everybody's got $20 left, but there's those two guys with 80 and they're just cherry picking $10 starting pitchers. Mm-hmm. I think that's the Pats strategy in this spring because they have a lot of money.
That's the smart way to do it.
It might be the right way to do it.
It really is. This year's become such a strange season because once that new CBA got signed, the cap went down $9 million from where it was before the lockout happened and before that uncapped year. And then B, it's stopped growing. It's grown, I think, 2%. I wrote about this on Monday. It's grown like 2% over the last 3 years, whereas before it was growing about 8% year after year after year. So you could build in those salary increases for your veterans. And now you can't do that because the cap's not really growing, but you have these salaries from before the CBA and then even after the CBA that are just growing and growing and taking up more of your cap space, and you have to adjust for that. And the result has been just this huge pool of veterans who are useful players, not superstars, but you get your Ed Reeds, you get your Sione Pujas, you get Antoine Winfield, Antonio Garay, Michael Hoff. All these are all guys who have been cut the past 2 days, let alone the guys who have hit the market and haven't got deals yet. So absolutely, for sure, I think after about a week, maybe a week to 10 days, there's going to be just these players who are going to be every bit as good as the guys who have signed already, but who are going to get $1 million for 1 year or $3 million over 2 years, and the smart teams are waiting it out. I think the Patriots qualify as a smart team.
Well, I love nothing more than teams spending money atrociously. It's probably my single favorite thing about writing about the NBA when teams do this. I just spent 6,000 words last Friday writing about the worst NBA contracts. You mentioned one of the things that happens in the NBA all the time, and it seems to be happening in the NFL this week. The teams, like Carlos Delfino is a great example. A swingman who basically Houston's paying 1 year, $3 million to. He didn't get a contract till August. In July, all the guys who are like him signed for more years and more money, but he basically does the same thing as those guys. So Houston just waited, they got him. And I wonder if that's going to happen in football. That's one thing. The other thing is when a team it's almost like they have the money in their wallet and they feel like they have to spend it within a certain amount of time. That's the feeling the Colts gave me over these past few days. Are the Colts the leader right now for most atrocious spring performance by a team?
Oh, for sure. And the thing is, they have Andrew Luck, so they can probably get away with it, which is the scary thing. They're paying $4 million for a guy who's going to be one of the 5 or 6 best quarterbacks in football next year.
Yep.
But I think the other thing that comes into play with the Colts is that they flew a little close to the sun. They got too good too quick, and I think they think they're a lot closer than they actually are. I mean, they obviously made the playoffs, but they played one of the easiest schedules of the past 5 years. They were incredibly good in close games, which is not consistent from year to year, which we know. And they're going to play a tougher schedule. They're not going to be so lucky in close games next year. And they're really like a 7-9, 8-8 team masquerading as an 11-5 team. And the Colts are basically trying to bring in these small parts. They're signing guys like Eric Walden for $60 million for 4 years, which is insane. But they're spending money to bring in these very specific guys who just aren't worth it. I mean, you can get a guy who's every bit as good as the players they've brought in next week for $1 million for 1 year. And the funny thing is last year, their success was built on a team where really they had a lot of guys like that. They brought in Donnie Avery. They brought in these guys who were either, later round picks or fought some floating around the league because they didn't care. They just had to cut cap space and create new opportunities for players, and they did well. So now they're going through the strange tact of ignoring what worked for them last year and trying to spend to build a team they want to think they are. And the reality is it's going to end up biting them for sure. I think it's not going to be something that kills their hopes because they still have Andrew Luck, but it's going to hurt them and they're going to regress next year and they're going to wonder why. And it's going to be because they went out and signed mediocre players to decent money contracts.
It reminded me a little bit of what the Cavaliers did during the first couple of years of LeBron's career. Mm-hmm. When they were like, we can be good. Here's some money for Daniel Marshall. And they just started giving these crazy contracts around. And you can't do that. Everyone should follow. It's always a good idea to follow Sam Presti, just in general. Although I still don't agree with the James Harden trade. But the way he built around Kevin Durant is the model for how you should build around young superstars. There's no rush. They're not going anywhere. Andrew Luck's going to be a Colt 12 years from now. So take your time. I hated what they did. And I agree with you. They are the all-time regression candidate. When are the over-unders come out? Next month?
They're going to be, I think, last year, Cantor posted them the first week of May. So hopefully around then. And they're going to go up, I think, at 8.5. Be my guess.
I was laughing. Part of the fun now that you've been writing for us for so long is seeing some of these signings and knowing how you're going to react. And with Tennessee signed Sean Green. I was dying. I was like, Barnwell's not going to like this. Guaranteed money to a backup running back when they're already overpaying their first string running back. A staple to get Barnwell upset.
And the funny thing is, I had gone on the radio about 2 hours earlier, and they said, Sean Green might come over here. And what do you think he's worth? And I said, maybe 3 years, $6 million if you're really going to go out of your way to pay him. And they gave him almost twice that. So
wow.
It's one of those wonderful things that the Titans do sometimes.
You should name that. I think you should give it a moniker.
I like that.
Maybe who did Carolina overpay? Jonathan Stewart?
They gave D'Angelo Williams like $22 million guaranteed when they had Jonathan Stewart, who was their first round pick, making $2 million a year waiting in the wing.
But then they overpaid Jonathan Stewart, even though they just overpaid D'Angelo Williams.
Yes, and then they still wouldn't run the ball on 4th and inches against the Falcons on the road to win the game.
The good thing for
Football's solid,
Carolina,
man.
but they're off the hook now thanks to the Colts.
That's true.
Carolina, I don't know if they've done anything nuts. So I'm looking at the ESPN free agent tracker. I didn't realize Cliff Averill was ranked so high. That was
I
a
feel like
steal.
the rankings are a little hit or miss on the ESPN ranker. Not to attack the WWL. But.
No, please do. I love all attacks on the WW. But they had Cliff Averill as the fourth free agent.
Outdated.
Well, they had him as fourth, but like for instance, Joe Flacco's fifth, and if you're really trying to make the right list, Joe Flacco was the number one free agent. He was going to get the most money and was the biggest priority to the team who had him.
Right,
but,
of course.
Jake Long is at the top of their list, and it does seem like he's going to leave Miami. Why would Miami let Jake Long go?
Because, well, I'll tell you why Jake Long is being let go. He took a 16-hour physical at Rams headquarters yesterday.
Oh, God. There you go.
I mean,
Say no more.
I might not be exaggerating. So the fact that you need to, when you have a top first overall pick, maybe a top 5 offensive lineman with that sort of history hitting free agency, and you haven't met your facility for 12 hours or 14 hours, and you don't sign him, that should tell you everything you need to know about Jake Long and why he's leaving Miami. I mean, I don't think the Dolphins are great talent evaluators by any means, but that's not a good sign. And the problem is, Jake Long's going to the Rams, who are usually one of the most injury-prone teams in the league. What he really needs is like the NFL equivalent of the Phoenix Suns training staff, where they're just incredible at keeping guys healthy. And maybe you're going to insinuate other stuff about the Phoenix Suns training staff that I'm not going to dare insinuate.
No, that was just joking last week.
I know. But there are teams like the Niners, for example, are very good at keeping players healthy and have been over the past several years.
It's so funny you said that because that was
long, but injury-prone players should try and go to teams that have good training staffs and have historically kept players healthy.
When you started that whole part, in my head, I had the Niners. They've done a nice job of keeping everyone on the field and actually making people almost, taking these third, fourth round picks and all of a sudden they make a leap. Like it just seemed like a natural candidate for Jake Long.
And I think someone like Charles Woodson, who they brought in for a visit, I believe, who's had some injury issues over the past couple of years and is old and kind of needs to be maintained, he could be a great fit there.
Question. Victor Cruz.
Oh,
You're
boy.
a Giants fan.
Do we have to do this? Come on.
Yeah, we absolutely have to. So Welker leaves, and there's about 2 hours there where I get super excited because I'm thinking, oh, Victor Cruz. Like, he's like a rich man's Welker. Like, he'd be unbelievable with Brady. And then they signed Amendola. But the price for Victor Cruz is a new contract and a first-round pick. If I'm picking at the end of the first round, I want Victor Cruz on my team.
Of course.
So why isn't there a Victor Cruz market?
Well, either A, the NFL is colluding and no restricted free agents are getting contracts, which is what we saw with Mike Wallace last year.
Yep.
Or B, people think the Giants are going to match. And the Giants, they could match a Victor Cruz contract, and it might lock up. It's like the NBA where something on an offer sheet locks up what you can do otherwise for a few days because you have to wait for the other team to match. I think the team it makes total sense for, and I wrote about this, was the Vikings, who just have an extra first-round pick from the Percy Harvin trade.
Yep.
They would be trading the 23rd pick, and they got the 25th pick from the Seahawks in the Percy Harvin trade. So they would be going down 2 slots and trading Harvin, who obviously is really talented, but has an injury history.
A lot of red flags.
Did not get along very well with people there.
Yeah. And
didn't really fit Christian Ponder, who's has sort of a weak arm. For Victor Cruz, who is by all accounts a very well-respected, very well-liked guy among the Giants. At least a year older than Harvin, but really fits Christian Ponder a lot better. Is sort of an underneath route runner who can make first downs and sort of create plays and not have to make big plays downfield. I think it makes total sense for them to go after Victor Cruz and try and give him a deal where they have a big guarantee in the first year and dare the Giants to try and match it.
That's not the team I would have picked.
Who are you picking?
The Redskins, because it's a divisional rival and you structure the contract so that the Giants are screwed if they match it. And you're just hurting a team that you play 2 times. Because let's be honest, the Giants are matching whatever offer people are throwing at Victor Cruz. So
you would figure.
Your goal is to make the Giants make it hurt for them to match it. And that's why I'm surprised. This is actually something Jerry Jones probably would have done if the Cowboys didn't have such a good first rounder. If he was like the 28th pick, couldn't you totally see him like making some crazy Victor Cruz offer trying to get the Giants to match it, but they can't take the risk with where they're picking.
Right. The only problem is the Redskins have the cap issue from that penalty from a couple of years ago where they had like $18 million missing off their cap.
Oh, yeah.
But I think that's one reason they can't do it. I think if you're going to try and really structure a deal for the Giants to struggle to match it, you have to put a big guarantee in the first year. You have to put $15, $16, $17 million guaranteed in the first year of the contract. And the Redskins can't afford to do that. They don't have the cap space for it, but the Vikings do. And there are a few teams out there who could theoretically do it, but
the Patriots did too.
As a Giants fan, I don't want that to happen.
Yeah, Victor Cruz is really good. That's somebody that people should be courting him right now and trying to sign him. I don't totally understand that. The other guy, well, first of all, were you surprised by the money Mike Wallace got?
A little bit. You know, I didn't think he was appreciably better than Joy Bowe or Percy Harvin, and he got a few extra $1 million guaranteed. But I think that was just the Dolphins panicking and bidding against themselves and trying to make sure that he wouldn't leave after he got there on the first day of free agency. And the Dolphins are pretty dumb, so it doesn't surprise me.
Wasn't there some stat that when Roethlisberger played, he was great, and when he was with the other guys, he was terrible?
Yeah, I did a big thing on it last year.
Yeah.
I actually wrote about it this year, too, where, like, when Roethlisberger was out he was out for 3.5 games, and Wallace had, like, 4 catches for 50 yards over that 3-game period, or 7 catches for 50 yards or something, and otherwise he was, pretty consistently very good. But the reality is he's not bringing Ben Roethlisberger to wherever he goes. He's playing with Ryan Tannehill now, and Ryan Tannehill has some promise, but he's not Ben Roethlisberger. So I feel like it's worth trying because he's really good. He does have the talent level of a really good player, and he can be, one of the 5 best receivers in football if everything goes right for him. But it's a lot of money to pay for a market where receivers just aren't going for that much money. Like, would you rather have Wallace for $60 million with $30 million guaranteed, or would you rather have Wes Welker for 2 years with $12 million?
It's no contest.
Right.
Lot of semi-washed up big name veterans available who might not be washed up. And it's almost like Russian roulette at this point where you just don't know. Like you have Ed Reed, you have Dwight Freeney, you have Greg Jennings, you have Steven Jackson, you have O.C. Umenora, Urlacher, who I wouldn't go near. Anybody who signs Urlacher is an idiot.
You have an awesome Madden team from about 2006. I mean, your Madden team is phenomenal.
Charles Woodson and Nnamdi Asomugha and James Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
So if you were running a team, which one of those guys would you feel the best about going after?
I'm going to say someone. I'm going to say Nnamdi Asomugha. And obviously, he was so bad last year. I mean, he was just a shell of the guy he used to be. And there were the weird reports about him, like, eating lunch in his car, which I guess I can understand. Eagles don't like they were a very fun team to be around last year. But I feel like Asomugha had one of those years where he just lost his confidence. He kind of, maybe he was hurt a little bit and didn't talk about it. But he's still not that old. And he was so good so recently that it's hard to fathom that in the right scheme, given the right role, he wouldn't be really productive again. I think if the Niners signed him, for example, they could use him as sort of like a hybrid. Maybe not a hybrid. Maybe they can move him to safety. He started as a safety and played some safety in college, but he does have good instincts, and he does know how to read opposing offenses pretty well, and he would be useful. I feel like it would be very hard for him to be useless, whereas those other guys, like James Harrison, for example, I could see James Harrison having like 2 sacks and 14 starts this year, retiring, just because guys who leave the Steelers don't do very well.
Yeah.
And Asomugha did stay pretty much healthy, so I feel like he would be the guy I'd go for.
If the 2 signings that would make me happy for the Patriots, just that if you were just looking at the veterans, I love Ed Reed. I know they're probably, it seems like he's going to sign with Houston, but I would love that guy for 1 year. I think he's just a classic Rodney Harrison type Patriot signing. Him and Belichick love each other. Mm-hmm. We need a little more attitude in that defense anyway. That would excite me. And I think Freeney has something left in the tank. I thought he was good last year. Do you think he was good last year?
No.
No, why not?
But he was playing 3-4. He's playing outside linebacker. He's playing linebacker. Which is not what he's good at. He's a 4-3 rush defensive end. He doesn't drop back into coverage. And I think if he goes somewhere where he can just be a 4-3 pass rusher, he could be useful. I think I would have liked to see him actually go to the Seahawks instead of Averill. I think Averill was a good signing, but I think for the role that Averill's going to play, which is sort of situational pass rusher with a little more built in, I think Freeney could be that guy for a lot of teams. So I think if you're playing a 4-3, Freeney makes a lot of sense.
I didn't like the way they used him, but I still felt like he could explode off the ball, which is like if you're looking at pass rushers.
For sure.
Yeah. That's why I would sign him. And I would put him, I would just tell him, look, you're only going to play half the game. You're going to rush the passer, and that's it. We don't want you to do anything else. We don't know what the Colts were thinking last year with how they used you, but we're not going to do that here.
Right. So it's like with Ted Washington, when Ted Washington was on the team and they had him come in for rundowns, but okay, you're going to sit on the sideline on third down, but we're going to have you come in anytime there's even a threat of a run play, and you're going to stand in the middle and occupy people.
Right.
It makes sense. Ed Reed, I'm skeptical because when was the last time that a team was so closely associated with one guy who had just won a Super Bowl with Ed Reed, and they let him go without even making him an offer? I mean, the Ravens have had no interest whatsoever in re-signing Ed Reed. Isn't that weird?
Wouldn't you say,
doesn't that say something?
The Ravens kind of seem like they feel like they lucked out with that Super Bowl and they're cashing in. They're almost like rebuilding the team. I don't even know. Would you even say they're going for it this year?
I don't think they're going for it. I think they're trying to stay relevant while they retool, which
yes,
yeah, but I don't think they're a serious threat to win the Super Bowl again.
It seems like they were pretty happy with the title for obvious reasons. They wanted to take care of Flacco, which they did. And other than that, they're just kind of, they're going to try to stay relevant, maybe get lucky with a couple veteran free agents down the road, but they lost a lot of their team. Like Reed and Lewis were the two leaders of that team. I thought Kruger was one of the best guys they had last year. I really thought he was an impact guy, and just on down the line, I don't know what, like Bolden was somebody who made. I don't understand why he was pretty average in the regular season, then became this postseason monster, but he made huge plays in the postseason. And I don't know where they're going to replace that.
Right, and I think they were at a crossroads where they had to decide. Okay, I think they are smart because they're not half-assing it. Like they're not signing 3 veterans and letting 3 veterans go. They're really going to rebuild, and they're really going to try and get younger and have some cap space over the next couple of years to try and bring in players who are going to be impact players without locking up a 33-year-old Anquan Bolden who gets hit constantly and is going to be hurt, or Ed Reed in his mid-30s who last year lost a step and wasn't the same guy, or not Ray Lewis, because Ray Lewis retired obviously, but I think they're going about it in a really interesting way. When you win a title, you do have that kind of flexibility, you do have that kind of cachet where you can get your fans to trust you and not have to deal with the fans being too stressed out about stuff. So I think it's really interesting, and I feel like it's not perfect. I think you'd want to lock up Daniel Ellerbe, who was 27 and who was going to be your kind of leader on defense next year, and they didn't get him. But
right.
They're taking steps in the right direction, I think, and I think they're going to be a better team over the next 3 years than they would have been if they had locked up all those guys.
I forgot another guy I wanted the Patriots to get, a former Football Outsiders cover boy, object of the affection of Football Outsiders. I don't know what the right word is, but Adrian Wilson.
Mm-hmm.
Might be able to get one more year out of him. The Cardinals' defense was pretty good last year.
I will tell you, instead of Adrian Wilson, I'd rather have Kerry Rhodes. I thought played better than Adrian Wilson last year. Was also on a very good part of the Cardinals defense, and was cut, and would not be available. Would not cost very much. Maybe a year or two, maybe $4 or $5 million, I would guess. He could be a really impact player for them. I feel like Wilson has sort of a bigger name, but Rhodes actually outplayed him last year.
I'd take either.
Fine by me.
Detroit had, you wrote about this today, Detroit had one obvious strength, which was a very good defensive line, although maybe a tiny bit overrated, but still just the names and the bodies they had.
Mm-hmm.
They decided to move away from that. And then they spent money on Reggie Bush. I don't know what their identity is now. And I'm not sure they should have brought their coach back. That's another team I'm looking at with the unders. Do you agree?
Mm-hmm. A tough division, and I feel like they probably have the least talent of any team in the division. And they're one Calvin Johnson injury away from being totally useless.
Yes.
The hard part for them is that, like I've mentioned it before, they're sort of stuck with those big rookie contracts for Matthew Stafford and Ndamukong Suh, and we're stuck with Calvin Johnson until they renegotiated his deal last year. And those guys take up a disproportionate amount of their cap because they're contracts from the old rookie scale and the old CBA. And they were cap strapped the past 2 years. They were out of money. They couldn't add to the team. You know, but after that 10-6 season where they were not the best team in football by any means, but they were competitive and made it to the playoffs, they couldn't afford to bring in anybody else. And so this is what they're doing. They're dumping Cal Vandenbosch. They're dumping their, half their offensive line. They're dumping players who were a big part of that team, Louis Delmas, and they're plugging the holes that people perceive to be there. They brought in Glover Quinn, who's a safety from the Texans. They brought in Reggie Bush, and they're not going to have the same issues they had last year, but they're going to have different issues. I don't know if that's better. I really feel like they made a lateral move with the guys they brought in, and I think they're just desperately trying to change things in the hope that changing things around is going to right the ship. And I don't know that I'm on their under because they were a little unlucky this year. I think they were 4-12 and had the point differential of the 6.5 win team. So I would normally go over with them, but it depends on what the line gets posted. I think it's posted at 8. I'm not going to want to go over it by any means.
We should talk about the Chiefs. It's possible the Chiefs are actually like making smart moves. I'm not willing to emotionally accept it, but I like the Alex Smith trade. Mm-hmm. Who's the other free agent? They're bringing back Brandon Albert, right?
I believe they franchised Brandon Albert, I believe.
Yeah. What was the other thing they did?
They re-signed Bo.
One other thing. Which one?
They re-signed Dwayne Bowe.
Oh, didn't they sign Chase Daniel?
They signed Chase Daniel as well.
I've always enjoyed Chase Daniel. I like that one. I thought that was a good signing.
Mm-hmm. I agree with you. I think Chase Daniel seems like the kind of guy who would succeed in the Andy Reid offense. Undersized guy, but accurate. Seems like he'd be, seems like he would kind of get the job done without being really all that good, but good enough to get by. Kind of a Kevin Cobb, maybe a little bit of a better version of Kevin Cobb. And I'm intrigued. He's always looked good in the preseason, and not that the preseason necessarily means something, but I feel like he's worth a shot. But at the same time, Bill, we were both on the Joe Webb bandwagon, and that careened off a cliff last year. So maybe our taste in backup quarterbacks is a little questionable these days.
I was in the hospital for a month. The Joe Webb bandwagon was interesting though, because it was more a case of he would just come in garbage time down 30 and light it up. When I watched Chase Daniel in the preseason, I would think to myself, wow, this guy's actually good. Like, why doesn't a team try to trade for him? Which rarely you get that feeling during preseason games. And I might have just seen the best 3 preseason games he had, but he did seem like there was something going on. I also, they have the number 1 pick in the draft, which it's the least sexy draft, copyright Matthew Berry. It's the least sexy draft I can remember. I think the top 2 picks are probably going to be offensive linemen. But the bottom line is they're going to get the best offensive lineman in the draft. They're getting this guy who's, I think they're playing him at right tackle this year, but he's probably left tackle long term. So they're going to have a good line. We know Alex Smith is competent. The guy made the NFC Championship game. They have Jamal Charles. They brought back Dwayne Bowe. They're going to be in a division that, other than Denver, is going to be shaky again. Mm-hmm. Could the Chiefs be a sleeper with Andy?
I really feel like they can be. And the thing I think, at least I really underestimate, and I think a lot of people underestimate, is just, you wrote about it too, I think, going from a terrible bottom of the barrel quarterback situation to even an average or slightly below average quarterback is such a huge upgrade that people always underestimate it. And going from Matt Castle and Brady Quinn to even Alex Smith, who maybe is the 20th best quarterback in football, with Andy Reid coordinating the offense, that's an enormous upgrade.
Well, 2 upgrades. I wrote last year in September, I unveiled wins above Raheem Morris, which was one of my ideas I was most proud of. Warm, as it's called. When you go from a terrible coach to a decent coach, what's that worth? And I don't think Andy Reid at this point of his career, he's going to have strengths and weaknesses, but at the same time, he's going to be better than Romeo Crennel was. And
I like wins over Romeo Crennel, so you have work.
Well, people were saying I should call Romeo Mick Crennel, and then it could be Rod Marinelli, Romeo Mick Crennel, or Raheem Morris, because they all have RM initials, so that could work. Hey, as we're talking, I just went on the Chiefs team page. They signed Sean Smith from the Dolphins just now.
Really?
That's a big one.
The BS report. That's exciting.
That's a big one. The
Chiefs might have been the best cornerback on the market.
I'm going over.
You're going over. I'm with you. I'm over. What did they post that? 8? It'll probably be 8. Probably maybe 7.5. I'll go over 7.5 all day with you, Bill.
So it looks like a 3-year deal. I'm sure they gave him a lot of guaranteed money, but yeah, the Chiefs could be. It's getting pretty exciting for the Chiefs. It never hurts to be in a division with the Raiders and Chargers either.
Right, and they had 6 Pro Bowlers last year out of 2-14 teams. So
yeah,
it wasn't like they're talentless. They have a decent core of players, and they made the playoffs a couple of years ago, and they weren't a terrible team. But the biggest thing for them is Alex Smith. Alex Smith can be the 20th best quarterback in football. They can be a 8-8, 9-7 team.
Last thing, you went to the Sloan Conference 2 weeks ago.
We missed you.
We should say that the free agent stuff, well, you come on next week, we can finish this because there's so many dominoes that haven't fallen yet. But at the very least, we have a good feel for the first couple of days. And I think the one thing that stood out this year with free agency was, other than the Mike Wallace crazy contract, which wasn't even totally crazy, like we didn't have those big Mario Williams type contracts this year. And even the big contracts weren't that big. It really does seem like there's a fiscal responsibility for the most part, the Colts aside and a couple other teams. But I'm going to be very interested to see how this plays out. I think it's one of the most interesting free agency periods we have because of all the veterans who really might be able to be available for 1 year. But let's go to the Sloan Conference. Any big football revelations that stood out for you this year?
I think the biggest football revelation was that Scott Pioli seemed like a pretty nice dude.
Wow.
Which I was not expecting. Not that he doesn't have a reputation as a good human being, but it was just, you read the articles about how, Pioli is reportedly tapping phones and whatnot. And he seemed like a super nice guy, very down to earth and interested in what analytics might offer, which was very surprising to me. There were 18 NFL teams represented there. I think the NBA said there were, or people who would know said that every NBA team was represented except for the Lakers and maybe the Clippers. But in the NFL, there were 18 teams. There were a few general managers. Phil Emery was there, Thomas Dimitrioff, and I think it's happening. It's not happening to the extent that it's happening in basketball or baseball, but there are teams who are doing this stuff in a way that weren't doing it 5 years ago. And so that in and of itself is exciting. Now, I don't know necessarily what they're doing, or I know, but I can't talk about it too much. But we're getting to the point where, smart people are going to be actually influencing decision making. So that's a big step forward. That's exciting, even if it's not necessarily something that's being presented at Sloan. Just knowing that's happening and seeing that's happening from who's there is a big step in the right direction.
I think the biggest problem with football stats is just the sample size.
Right.
And the amount of turnover each year. In basketball, which I was really dubious that it was ever going to work in basketball beyond very primitive degrees, but what they've been able to do with 5-man units and the per 100 possessions offensively and defensively and shot locations, and I still think it's really hard to figure out a better way to determine which players are better than other players when we already had really good stats for that. But the fact that we can now kind of show the effect that Roy Hibbert has on a team's defense, where we couldn't have done that 5 years ago, is really fascinating to me. It's gone to a level much higher than a much higher level than I thought it would be able to go.
Well, now we can determine that Rudy Gay sucks, and that nobody should pay Rudy Gay $50 million a year.
Yeah, Rudy Gay's he's turned into the kind of the litmus test, right?
He really has. But I'll say this much about the sample size thing. It's true. But you can use that to your advantage, too, because then if you say, okay, the sample size for football is small, we shouldn't trust one season of data because it's only 16 games, use that to your advantage. And then trust that what you saw over one season isn't going to be the be-all, end-all for a player. Don't sign a guy because he had 10 touchdowns in a season when he's averaged 2 touchdowns a year over the previous 5 years like Mercedes Lewis did in Jacksonville. Don't pay a kicker $10 million over 4 years because he had a 95% field goal percentage in 1 year, because we know that's just like having 30 at-bats in baseball and hitting 350. You're not a 350 hitter. You just had a small 30 at-bat sample where you hit 350. That's an entire season for a kicker. So there are ways you can kind of shift it into your advantage if you're comfortable with the numbers. But you're right. Football is well behind basketball, and basketball is making huge strides, way bigger than any other sport. But basketball is still behind baseball.
Well, baseball is all stats. It's like it's almost not even fun to talk about anymore. Basketball is the best blend, I think, of the eye test and then the information. And then football, what'll be really interesting is if somebody decides to just follow the numbers straight through with how they make decisions during a game. And, if we're over the 40-yard line, we're going for it as long as it's not 4th and 10 or more, things like that. Or if we're inside the 5-yard line, we're going for it every time. We will never kick a field goal. I want to see a coach come out and say that, look, here are the situations where I'm always going for it. So you can criticize me now, but when it happens during a game, just know that I have already made the decision to do these things.
Right.
And that's when it's going to get really interesting, because some coaches, don't you think some coach will do that at some point?
You would figure, but I think more so than even needing a coach to be on board, you need an owner to be on board. Because if you're a coach and you know your owner's not going to just destroy you for going for it in a situation, if you have an owner who understands the numbers, that's the biggest thing right there. Once you have the owner on board, you don't care about the media. You don't care about what the fans are going to say, because you know the only person who makes the decisions on hiring or firing you is behind what you're doing. So I think there will be a coach over the next 10 years who is comfortable enough with the numbers to be that aggressive, and it'll help his team. It's not going to win him 5 more games a year, but it'll win him a game every couple of years in the margins that he wouldn't have won otherwise. And that's enough to make it worth your while.
The other problem, I do think teams play a little differently in the playoffs, and I don't know if stats can capture that. Like, for instance, the Ravens went into that Patriot game saying to themselves, we're going to annihilate their receivers, and we're going to let them catch the ball in front of us, and then we're going to kill them. And I don't know if that's something you can do during the season, especially because of the fines and the suspensions and all that stuff. But in that game, they were not worried about fines or suspensions, and they laid the smackdown on the Patriots. And, Hernandez got popped early. Welker got popped early. Ridley got famously popped, and that play ended up changing the game. But it affected the way everybody played on the Patriots, because they knew the Ravens were headhunting. And, that's an atypical situation, I feel like, for a game. And also, I think that's how to beat the Patriots. We've seen that now happen year after year, where you've had a defense go into the playoff game and say, all right, give them all that underneath stuff and then just kill them. And, going back to what we started talking about earlier, I do wonder if maybe that's part of why they didn't value Welker that much. Maybe they're thinking that style works for regular season, but for the playoffs, maybe they need a slightly different strategy. I don't know. What do you think?
Maybe they do. I mean, I don't. What you're saying makes a lot of sense, and I think that in most sports, when you look at what sort of works in the playoffs more so than in the regular season, defense tends to be more meaningful, and that's the old cliche. And it's not that you want to have a defense and not care about your offense, but having a better defense does play up a little better than having a good offense. At the same time, look back at the past few years, the Packers won a Super Bowl, Saints won a Super Bowl, and those teams, they throw the ball around a fair amount. They don't throw it underneath as much as the Patriots do, but they still throw the ball as sort of their primary weapon on either side of the football. So
right.
I feel like the problem is if Wes Welker catches that one pass against the Giants, I feel like we're not having this debate about whether the Patriots aren't fit to win.
It's a good
you only
point.
need something so small to go your way to flip something from being, a perfect strategy to an imperfect strategy. So I think that's the problem with football, is that the line between winning and losing and the line between success and failure can be so ridiculously thin at time because it comes down to such a fine line. Whereas in basketball, that's not always the case so much. You can kind of pinpoint things over a broader sample. In baseball, you have more at bats and more plays to work with. So I think we remember those one little play, those little plays in football a little more than I think we do in other sports.
Well, and I think that's a big reason why Belichick has the philosophy he does. He just wants to be in the mix every year and never wants to push all of his chips into the table for one specific year. He just wants to continually be relevant. And he knows that every year 6 teams can win the Super Bowl. He wants to be one of the 6, and then he's hoping to get breaks. But I do think that the fact that they just don't have a deep threat has really hurt this team in their last couple of playoff losses. That was the reason they signed Brandon Lloyd last year. That didn't work out. That was the reason they went after Ocho Cinco 2 years ago. That didn't work out. They haven't been able to get that one extra play, that one extra 40-yarder or whatever that it seems like every other team gets, and really is the reason Flacco made $120 million. Mm-hmm. You get 2 or 3 of those 40-yarders, and it kind of changes the course of where, it's just so much easier versus the Patriots, again and again, 3rd and 3, 3rd and 4. And in the regular season, it was great, but in the playoffs when everything gets heightened and, a tip ball or Brady can't really move around in the pocket as much, and just seemed like over and over again, I went from in the regular season thinking, oh, it's great, 3rd and 3, we got this, to in the playoffs thinking 3rd and 3, I hope, blah, blah, blah. And, maybe they have another move. I don't know. But
let me play devil's advocate
Victor
here.
Cruz.
You remember that Patriots-Ravens game? They did get a pass downfield. They got Welker downfield, I believe, for about 40 yards. And on the very next play, they're in the red zone. Brady has a pass tip. They throw an interception.
Right.
So it can still happen, even if you have that deep threat. And I think the Patriots would be better if they had a legitimate speed guy, even if it wasn't a superstar, even if it was someone like a Dante Stallworth's caliber from a few years ago, or someone who could stretch the field.
I mean, Jacoby Jones could have been the guy.
That's true.
That those guys are sitting there every year, and the 2 things they never go after are that random third receiver guy who can stretch the field, and returners. They always have a subpar returning game for the most part. And last year Edelman was okay, but then he got hurt. But when Leon Washington came in, I was excited. I was like, wow, we might actually be able to make plays with the return game this year. The Giants, though, it would have made me really happy to sign Victor Cruz from you. I just want to tell you that.
That would have hurt. That would have been so upsetting.
Would have been a good afterword for his autobiography. Switching teams. So Giants, you're happy with that, by the way? You're happy with the non-activity so far?
Yeah, I mean, they locked up Will Beatty, who I thought was a pretty good left tackle. They've, I have enough faith in the Giants and what they do at this point. I think they're going to draft well. There's no one out there who I think is really going to make a massive upgrade for them on their team. They're sort of built the way they are right now, and I feel like if they can stay healthy next year, they're going to be fine.
Did we ever figure out what happened to Eli last year?
I don't want to talk about that, though. Come on.
All right, I'll give you a couple more weeks to think about that. Barnwell, keep cranking out the free agency. We missed you. It's nice to have you back in the website.
Happy to be back.
Talk to you soon.
See you, Bill.
So I get to sign off. Whoa!
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.